Tonight, doctors trying to get to the bottom of a case surrounding the first Ebola patient diagnosed in the U.S. Could this be a situation of the CDC not getting their arms completely around this? And what are the possibilities of an outbreak unfolding on U.S. soil? Well, tonight, Dr. Gary Zeitlin joins us in studio. And new developments surrounding brain injuries in the NFL. A new report shows 96% of the deceased NFL players who donated their brains to science had a degenerative disease. We'll be speaking with a personal injury attorney who has a lot to say about the NFL and the recent scandal surrounding the University of Michigan player Shane Morris. Plus, a young man lost some of his most precious years after serving 3 years at Rikers for a case that never even went to trial. Delays in court proceedings held up his trial for that long, and we spoke with his attorney about the delays. And tonight, our legal panel will weigh in on the Sixth Amendment and our right to a speedy trial, why they say the process isn't always speedy at all. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we begin with some breaking news coming out of Washington late this afternoon. Secret Service Director Julia Pearson, she has resigned. That following security breaches at the White House, move coming just one day after Pearson was grilled on Capitol Hill by the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. By all accounts, she didn't do a good job of acquitting herself and making people comfortable that the solution was in place. Ms. Pearson worked for the Secret Service for 30 years. And now we're going to head out west to Texas, where an Ebola patient's condition has been upgraded from critical to serious. Authorities say the people who may have come in close contact with the patient have been identified and will be monitored for the next 3 weeks. Health officials in Texas are on high alert that after the first case of Ebola was diagnosed in the U.S. The man, who traveled to the U.S. from Liberia, is now in isolation at this Dallas hospital. Officials now focusing on about a dozen people he came in contact with, including several children. Governor Rick Perry and the Texas health officials, they spoke this afternoon.
Some school-age children have been identified as having had contact with the patient and are now being monitored at home.
Authorities have now identified the apartment complex where the Ebola patient was staying. Residents there now worried about their health.
Fear of spreading. Though it's one person, that affects so many people.
The man left Liberia September 19th, already infected, but top health officials say he was not contagious.
That was 4 or 5 days before he had his first symptoms. And with Ebola, you're not infectious until you have symptoms.
He landed in Dallas on September 20th and began showing symptoms on the 24th. 2 days later, the man came on his own to the Texas Presbyterian Hospital. Officials say he told a nurse that he'd been in Africa, but she did not relay that information, so he was sent home. On September 28th, that man was rushed back to the hospital by ambulance. 2 days later, on Tuesday, he was admitted after testing positive for Ebola. ABC's chief health and medical editor, Dr. Richard Besser, currently in Liberia for a second time, says everyone who flies out of the country is carefully screened.
But the man in Texas shows us that even when you're doing the right things, infected people can slip through.
And to put a little context on this, Dr. Richard Besser, you just saw, he also said the following to the Huffington Post about the outbreak in Liberia, saying, "This is the most devastating outbreak I've ever seen anywhere in the world, the most devastating outbreak I've ever covered as a reporter." Went on to say that I've worked in disease protection for 13 years. In fact, he was at the CDC, and I've never seen an outbreak as devastating as this one. We're very pleased to bring in our next guest, Dr. Gary Zeitlin. Dr. Zeitlin is the chief of infectious disease unit at White Plains Hospital, also physician practicing internal medicine and infectious disease at White Plains Medical Associates. He's kind enough to give us a few minutes. Thank you very much. Well, it's funny. I think for a lot of people, they saw this as an Africa problem, and they see the headline today that, hey, somebody in Texas has this. We'll give context to the states, but first, just to put a face on it, on a global level, if you will, the counts are 3,000 confirmed dead. The WHO has it close to like 10,000 dead. They don't know where it ends. It just gives, I think, people, obviously you're close to this, but people on the outside an idea how fast this kind of a thing can spread, especially in the undeveloped world.
Absolutely. The speed of spread, I think, is related to the lack of medical care in general, and particularly appropriate infection control precautions. Certainly it's not strictly an African problem, There have been related viruses in Germany as well as the Philippines. And in the U.S., over the last decade, there were 5 cases of hemorrhagic fever viruses which did not lead to outbreaks. I suspect most of that is related to appropriate infection control.
I've heard a lot of questions. It's funny. For some reason, I think if you're in TV, you know a lot more than you do. But they've asked questions about, well, Ebola is now stateside. Is there a reason for panic? And I say without qualifications, I say no. But what is the level of concern here, especially given the chain of events that we saw that played out in Texas and his exposure to other people, even if he wasn't fully showing symptoms at the time?
So it's very important to be concerned. I would agree with you that panic is not warranted. With this particular case, the CDC is doing extensive contact investigation, interviews for any possible person he may have come in contact with physically. So
they retrace the steps? Is that how this works? To see where not only how he got in here, but who he came in contact with?
Very detailed interviews regarding every moment the person may have spent with another person with direct physical contact. They do a tremendous amount of investigation.
I guess that's the challenge when we're talking about these infectious diseases in the 21st century, the portability. Everyone can go to every place, especially with Ebola, where you're not showing symptoms. And I know it's not transmitted at that point, but you could be fine when you're getting on the airplane or feel fine, and all of a sudden you're sick when you get on the ground. And as we saw in Texas, you may not be admitted the first time, and then you're further exposed to more people. That's the real danger I would expect in your specialty is, you know, trying to get patient zero quickly before they travel, as far as we've seen.
And certainly in the age of international travel, viruses can spread rapidly. I'm glad that with the media coverage, more folks are becoming aware of the problem. In general, in the United States, hospital infection control is equipped to gain control over even more transmissible viruses such as SARS. So to look back at the SARS epidemic, that was an airborne virus, meaning that it could go across from me to you without any physical contact.
You know, Doctor, it's funny, when you bring up SARS, I remember vividly, I had elected officials, both members of Congress, senators, and one of the things that was quickly, and for you folks at home, during the Bush administration, the fears got very alerted to this because people were like, wait a second, where are we going to develop a vaccine? Okay, and then how fast can we produce the vaccine? What's the distribution? How are we going to get this transmitted? And what happens to people that are sick? Where are we going to put these in quarantine areas? And quickly, we figured out there was no plan. That at least, and even the people, if they had a plan, the people that are supposed to effectuate it, they didn't even know what the plan was. Remember the stadiums? We were going to use big stadiums, open-air stadiums, to quarantine everybody? And I remember some of the stadium operators said, nobody told us this. Thankfully, it never came to that. But it did highlight, at least for me at a time a few years ago, there's not this clear plan that everybody seems to be on the same page about as to, you know, how to mitigate it, how to treat it, and also how to contain it, right? I mean, is that still an ongoing issue?
There's general agreement that at the minimum, if a suspected Ebola patient is seen at a hospital, that droplet precautions be initiated, meaning containment of any secretions, and hospitals have some degree of difference as to what additional precautions they would take. And there are certain situational things where if there is a suspicion that there will be more projectile droplets, more precautions can be taken.
But even beyond Ebola, we talked about SARS before, and you know, other strains here that are getting stronger and stronger here, that are more resistant, especially given all of the antibiotics and everything else that we as a society, thankfully with science, have. Is there concerns in your community that A, some of this stuff is getting more dangerous, and B, we're not all on the same page as to if there is an outbreak, how we're going to treat it?
So there is some degree of consensus, but with a lot of these things there are minor variations. I think for Ebola in particular, there is not a concern that the virus is becoming more virulent. It's quite virulent to start with, so the majority of people that contract it will die of the disease. So as you're alluding to with resistant bacteria, things of that sort, infection control is paramount, even more important than vaccines or developing new treatments. The goal really is to prevent it from the beginning.
Finally, if you're going to leave a message with folks, and I think you effectively said panic's not the way to go here with Ebola. It seems that our health agencies, the best in the world, seem to have a handle on this right now, at least domestically. But on the broader level and the challenges that this generation will probably endure may be different than previous generations. We're not talking Black Plague here, but are you comfortable that the coordination is there from all the agencies, that we're prepared to deal with it? Or do you think there needs to be a crash course where everybody's got to get on the same page if there is something, not an Ebola, but something else that's maybe harder to detect in the beginning and contain better?
Yeah. I think there is general consensus on most things. As time goes on and there's more experience with particular organisms, there'll be minor variations between certain local geographic areas, but I think for the important features of infection control, there is a broad consensus on how to prevent spread.
All right, that's good to know. Doctor, I really appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, everyone, when we come back, I'm going to editorialize here a little bit. It has been an interesting campaign to cover in the last few weeks, that for the New York race for governor. However, I think we've jumped the shark a little bit, and I'm going to tell you why right after this.